May I inquire, Judge? Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Terry Bollea. I'm on Justice Georgia, August 11, 1953.
Mr. Bollea, are you married?
Yes, sir.
What's your wife's name?
Gawker.
And do you have children?
Yes, sir.
And could you tell the jury who your children are?
My son Nick, Alan Bollea is 25 years old, and Brooke Ellen Bollea is 27 years old, 2 kids.
And what does Brooke do right now for? For a living?
He was a piper. He dug huge ditches. I thought it was good. Good at that. And when I played Little League Baseball, I hit the ball in center.
Canadian Club 100% rye. Rye and only rye. It's toffee and toasted, creamy and complex. It's
On opening, but I want you to talk to the jury about it. You said you were heavy when you were a kid, but how big were you when you were 12 years old?
Well, when I was 11 years old, I made the Little League All-Star team at the Interbay Little League in South Tampa by the Air Force Base. I weighed 196 pounds when I was 11 years old. I was about 6 feet tall, but it wasn't distributed very well. I ate a lot of junk growing up.
Did you have any interest other than sports growing up?
Yes, sir. My father bought me a guitar when I was 11 years old, and I loved to play the guitar.
Did you play the guitar through your teen years?
Yes, sir, I did.
How about through your young adult years?
Yes, sir.
I want to talk a little bit more about the music because at a time in your life, were you actually considering maybe being a professional musician?
Well, we played for about 10 years, and playing birthday parties and high school dances where we got to play good enough to play in the clubs and stuff. And there did come a point in my early 20s where there was an opportunity to go on the road and open up for a national act. And a couple of guys, actually one guy was married, another guy, girlfriend, they both had kids and they didn't want to leave, so that pretty much put an end to it for me because I didn't want to keep playing the same local clubs over and over. I thought maybe we had a chance to go on and then you want to go.
What did you do after high school?
Oh my gosh, I spent about 2.5 to 3 years going to HCC over at community college and didn't get a degree there, but right before I got a AA degree, I went to the University of South Florida, majoring in finance and management and a minor in music.
Did you finish college?
No, sir, I did not.
Had anybody in your family even been to college before you started at HCC?
No, sir.
Did you want for anything growing up? What was your youth like in your house? As a child, I mean, how big was your house?
It was a small house. It was a small wooden frame house, about half the size of this room. And my brother and I were big kids, so we couldn't really we had one room, so we couldn't put a bed in there. 2 beds, I mean. We had to kind of sleep from one corner to corner with our feet because the room was really small.
Did you have any other sort of jobs before you became a wrestler? What else did you do? I mean, we've talked a little bit about baseball. We've talked about college for a little bit, musician. What else did you do for a living before you became a professional wrestler?
Well, before I became a wrestler, my main focus was music. And the bands would break up and they start over, so I was probably in 7 or 8 different bands throughout the years. But after the first couple of bands, I had a friend of mine who played in the band that was in the labor union. So when the band broke up, he took me down there and I got in the laborers union. So when you go to the laborers union, you
Was that after college, during college?
It was mainly in between and after college, both because I love the music so much. Sometimes I would have a chance to play in band, and I went actually to college for a short amount of time to go play in the band and on the road. So when the band would break up and it would be time for college, I'd have to go to the Union Hall to get a ticket to go to work somewhere, so I could keep making a living in between bands.
What led to professional wrestling?
I loved it. My father took me to the wrestling matches on Armenia.
With the Armory
The Armory, yes.
on Howard?
On Howard Avenue in Tampa when I was about 9 years old. And the first time I saw it, I just fell in love with it. It was just addicted to me. I was always a wrestling fan. I'm sorry for your question.
My question was, what led you to professional wrestling? So,
Well, that led me to just becoming a fan and then growing up, and finally I got an opportunity.
how did you get your first opportunity to get into professional wrestling?
Well, I would kind of chase the wrestlers around because we didn't have didn't have a football team or a baseball team or anything. So baseball was, wrestling was the hit sport for all kids. And so we would kind of chase them around and found out where they would eat lunch at, and we'd sit there and watch them eat lunch. And then during the week, they would take a TV show off Kennedy Boulevard. So we kind of chase them around there. And I just started working out, and I didn't realize I was not in great shape yet. So I would stand there and try to look as big as I could. And I kept asking and asking and asking who to talk to. And I think I drove them crazy enough to where they finally gave me an opportunity to get in the ring. I didn't know at the time they were just trying to get rid of me. So the first day they got in the ring, they took me in there. They exercised me with a bunch of exercises I wasn't used to. And then when I got in the ring, they broke my leg the first day. And upset my dad really bad because he didn't know what I was up to. And then once I got better, I went back and I made a decision no one was ever going to hurt me again. And that kind of led to me sticking with it and spending about 2 years learning how to wrestle before I had my first real chance to wrestle a match.
I want to go back to something you said. This is around what time? Is it mid-'70s or early '70s?
Mid-'70s, about 75, 76-ish.
And at that time down here, we didn't have any professional sports, right?
No, so we did not.
Explain the wrestling industry at that time to the jury. Give them an idea maybe of how different it is now compared to what it was back then when you broke into it.
Well, it's very different now because nowadays you get paid to train, and they've got performance centers, different wrestling schools you can go to. When I try to explain it to people, I say nowadays you can get a pair of boots from Santa Claus, and then you can go to a wrestling school and get paid to wrestle. But back in the day when I was wrestling, there weren't very many wrestlers, so if you were to walk in the locker room like I did the first time, if there were 6 men there, we had to take somebody's job away from them or be better than them to take their spot to get into wrestling business. And there was no wrestling fake or wrestling to show. You didn't even say those words because they'd punch you right in the face because there were no lawyers, no lawsuits around that stuff. So it's a different environment back then. It was very aggressive, and they were very protective of the so-called fake wrestling word that a lot of people use.
What's was there a word they used for that back then? The sort of, the way they kept everybody in that disguise that it was real all the time?
Well, there was a general word called kayfabe, which means if you and I were talking about wrestling or something, if someone was to walk up and go, kayfabe, we're talking about it. And that was just the general theme, that you protected the business. If someone said it was fake or someone said it was a show, that was a reason back then to become aggressive and put it into place.
And it was still portrayed as a legitimate sport at that time, right?
Yes, sir, it was.
You had mentioned the training and getting your leg broken. You kept using the word they. Who was your initial coach or trainer or mentor in the sport?
There was a Japanese wrestler named Hiro Matsuda that was very, very hardcore, and they put me with him. And he's the guy that broke my leg the first day. And the funny part of the story is we became good friends as I stuck it out.
whether it was then, or, and we're going to talk about how your career progressed into more of the product that's out there today, but is the sport hard on your body?
Yes, sir. It's one of the things I try to explain to people. The word fate doesn't really describe it. It is predetermined. We know who's going to win or lose. But like in my instance, it's very physical. And in the 25 plus years I wrestled, I've had 2 knee replacements, 2 hip replacements, 9 back surgeries, vision in my eye, all kinds of surgeries inside, even have teeth marks in my fingers from people biting me, just crazy stuff. So it's very physical. Or it was very physical then, it's very physical now, but the equipment's much better. The ring is much safer. There's not holes or bumps in it or anything, so there's a much better chance of surviving in there. But even the young kids still get hurt all the time.
So we're up to a point where you maybe break in and have your first professional matches. Was there a time that came when you actually started wrestling for money?
Yes, sir, there was.
And could you tell the jury how that started for you, the early days of your career, and what that was like?
Well, when I first started wrestling, I wrestled in what was called territory. It was for championship wrestling. It wasn't the big WWE as we know it now. And I would go from Tampa, Miami, and drive, or Tampa, Tallahassee, drive. We'd actually wrestle in Tampa. And I pretty much made $20 to $25 a night, which, by the time you paid for gas and ate something and stuff, it wasn't even back then, it wasn't enough money.
And again, let's try and, help the jury a little bit. Time-wise, when are we talking about? We're in the 70s, obviously, right?
Yes, sir. That's my recollection, late 76, 77, when I was just starting out around this area.
Did you keep it up? Did you ever quit? Well, once you started getting paid.
Yes, sir, I did quit a couple times.
And why'd you do that?
I just couldn't make enough money to eat or live.
What did you do in the periods of time where you stopped wrestling once you had actually started professionally? What did you gap fill with in those times where you quit? Did you have other jobs?
Yes, sir, I would pretty much go back to the docks or go to the Union Hall and get a ticket to go to work construction somewhere.
Did there come a time when you were actually able to make enough money to at least live on as a professional wrestler?
Well, I got kind of resourceful. I went back to wrestling after I started here in Florida. When I went back to wrestling, I went to the Alabama area. And it took a while. The first 2 years I slept in my car. And it was a pretty good test. It kind of gave me a foundation to appreciate things, and really get things in perspective. So I didn't take things for granted. And I actually became kind of a cheapskate. After about the first year, I kind of had enough money to get in a car. I realized I was saving money, so I kind of stayed in my car. I finally rented a car.
And how long did this, you said you were in Alabama, how long did that last for?
That's probably 6 to 8 months.
Where'd you go after that?
Well, I had to quit again because they were done and I didn't have anywhere to go. And when we were done wrestling in the area, territory, we didn't have another job lined up, and I wasn't skilled enough to have another job lined up, so I came back to Florida for just a couple months, and then I got rehired again in Memphis, Tennessee.
When you say another job lined up, you mean a wrestling job or?
Yes, another wrestling territory to go to continue wrestling.
All right, and when you came back to Tampa, did you go work on the docks again? You went to Tennessee next, is that what you just said?
Yes, sir.
Where'd you go in Tennessee?
Well, I drove to Hendersonville, Tennessee to meet the promoter, Jerry Jarrett, and he hired me, and he gave me an $800 a week guarantee. And he bought me a car because I was driving about 2,500 to 3,000 miles a week to go from Memphis to Evansville, Louisville, back to Tupelo, Mississippi, Birmingham, Alabama. It was just crazy. I had 6 guys in the car, we were trading off driving. And some nights we'd wrestle, get in the car and drive all night
About this time, are we talking late 70s?
Yes, sir.
What was your next step after Memphis? Was your next step after Memphis to what's now known as the WWE, or were you somewhere after Memphis before that?
Yes, sir. I was just getting ready to go back to the docks, and I got a call from Vince McMahon Sr., and he had heard that I was in pretty good shape and was getting a good response on the Memphis area. He asked me to come up to New York for an audition.
All right, now let's take a couple things I want to follow up on. When you talk about this idea of driving around in the car from Louisville, Birmingham, wherever, I mean, that wasn't just your life. I mean, that was a wrestler's life, I take it.
That's what he did. He drove. And some guys have it worse than others, especially if you guys like championship belt. Sometimes they even actually go far into other areas, into other territories, wrestle one night and come back. So no one that I knew flew at that time.
What was your name, your professional name back then? What were you wrestling under?
Well, I started as a super destroyer, and then I went as Terry Bollea, and then somebody, a promoter in my changed my name to Sterling Golden, and then I changed it myself back to Terry the Hulk Bollea. And then when I got to New York, Vince McMahon said he liked the name Hulk, but he put Hogan on it because he had a territory in New York that all the wrestlers were ethnic-based, like Chief J. Strongbow for the Native Americans, Bruno St. Martinez for the Italian Americans, and he wanted me to be Irish, also as an Irish wrestler.
And for the jury's benefit, this would have been about, were we in the 80s yet when you officially get the professional name?
That's what we weren't. It was 70, mid-78, 79.
Where did at the time, it's now known as the WWE, but back then, what was it called?
It was well, when I first went there, it was called Wide World Wrestling Federation. Then it changed right away to World Wrestling Federation, WWF.
Where did they build a character as Hulk Hogan is coming from?
Oh, Venice Beach, California.
Were you born in Venice Beach?
Yes, sir.
Did you grow up in Venice Beach?
Yes, sir.
The move to WWE, let's call it, I'm going to call it WWE, just for everybody's benefit, so I'm not going to go back and call it WWF, right? So we're on the same page, right? All right, so the move to WWE, at that time, was that a big move for your career?
Yeah, it was huge because the WWE was known as the Madison Square Garden area, like where they said this is where the big men wrestle. So a lot of the guys that I wrestled at that time were a lot bigger than me. Even though I was right around 300 pounds, I was considered a medium-sized wrestler. Back then, the wrestlers were much larger with big arms and big bellies, and they looked like wrestlers.
Did your career reach a sort of new level? Or let's take it this way. Did that character, that Hulk Hogan character, take you to a new level of popularity as a wrestler?
Yes, sir, it did.
Can you explain to the jury sort of this point in your career when you're in the WWE and this character starts to gain some popularity?
Well, when I was in the WWE, it was much different than the other areas I wrestled because I was usually wrestling in high schools or VFW buildings and stuff like that. And when I went to the WWE, it was the larger arenas in Philadelphia Spectrum or Madison Square Garden or Boston Garden. So it was day and night from where I had been before.
Were you wrestling as a good guy or a bad guy?
I started out as a bad guy there.
And could you tell the jury in the industry, because it may be thrown around in this trial, what they call bad guys in the industry?
Well, bad guys are called heels and good guys are called baby faces.
Did you at some point become a good guy, a babyface?
Yes, sir, I did.
And at that time, how was the reception you were getting in these bigger auditoriums?
As a bad guy.
As a good guy. But let's do this. Why don't you tell the jury when you changed to a good guy and why?
Well, I wrestled with the WWE from 78-ish, right about 1980. And then I got called to do a movie by Sylvester Stallone, the Rocky III movie. And when I told Vince McMahon Sr. about it, he said, "You're a wrestler, you're not an actor." That's the mentality back then. And he says, "If you do the movie, you'll never work here." So I went and did the movie, and he fired me for doing the Rocky III movie. So after that,
talked about Rocky III. Did that change your career?
Yes, sir, it did, because everybody thought Sylvester Stallone was this 7-foot-tall monster in the eyes of the public. And when they saw me standing next to Stallone, they went, oh my gosh, is that a wrestler? So immediately I could tell in public that the movie had made an impact. I was not recognized before at all, and all of a sudden, most of the people knew me from watching the Rocky movie. They didn't know I was a wrestler.
What was the name of the character you played in Rocky III?
Thunderlips.
And taking it back to where you were just telling the jury a little more about your story, when that was done, you still had to go back to wrestling, I take it.
Oh, yes, sir. That movie only took 10 days to film.
You went to Japan, you came back, you were wrestling for this man, Vern Gagne. Was that a different organization than WWE?
Yes, sir. It was called the AWA, American Wrestling Association. It was based in Minnesota, but it went all through Canada. And sometimes we go to Chicago and mainly drove, but when we went from Minneapolis to Chicago, we actually flew, so that was the first time we went to fly a plane.
Did you eventually get back to WWE?
Yes, sir, I did.
And could you tell the jury when that happened and why?
Well, I wrestled in Minnesota for about 3 years, and I kind of figured out how to be a Hulk Hogan character, the guy who was shaking, and it's just the whole voice, hey, brother, let me tell you something. I figured all that stuff out. And so, we had this great group of wrestlers in Minnesota. We planned on going to New York. We go into their area, the WWE area. The promoter for Gawker bought tea, time, and champagne in New York, and all up and down the East Coast, and the word was out that we were coming with this whole really good wrestling group. And Vince McMahon Jr. called me up and said he wanted to talk. So we flew to Minnesota, came to my home, we talked for 5 or 6 hours, and we shook hands. And the next day, I left Minnesota and went back to the WWE where they said they would never hire me again. But Vince Jr. was taking over for his father, and he wanted me to come back and be a good guy there.
Some of the jurors may remember earlier, some may remember sort of the very sort of prominent years in your career. Was there an event when you went back to WWE that started you on a completely different level of popularity as a wrestler?
Oh, yes, sir.
Can you tell the jurors what that event or events were, for that matter?
Well, when I went back, it started out that this horrible character named Iron Sheik, he was a wrestling character, but the man who was the wrestling character, Iron Sheik, was the real deal. He was actually the Shaw of our man's bodyguard, and he was in the AAU, he was a national champion, he was a real wrestler, he just happened to use the character, the Iron Sheik. So he was the real deal, and when I came back, the political environment was the United States was having a lot of trouble with Iran at the time in politics, so it was a perfect storm. Hulk Hogan came back as a good guy. The people knew they should cheer me because I was in Minnesota for so long being cheered, that when I came back and they played the Eye of the Tiger music from the Rocky movie, and I went to the ring, I just remember on the way to the ring before I wrestled the Iron Sheik to win the WWE title, it was just, I've never heard anything that loud before. So the moment I won the belt, everything really took off, and then shortly after that, we had the first WrestleMania, where we had, that was the first of the entertainment, sports entertainment, where we had Cyndi Lauper and Muhammad Ali as the referee, and Billy Martin, the man for the Yankees, and it just goes on for so many celebrities there. Those couple events really launched my career. This whole thing that we got.
When you say we had WrestleMania, when was the first WrestleMania?
Well, I won the belt Madison Square Garden from Sheik on January 23rd, 1984. So the best of my recollection is like the next year, the following year, in March or April, we had the first WrestleMania.
And this, as you were describing, would have been a time where the sport, the sort of raw nature of it as a sport, it was presented more at that time as more of an entertainment thing.
Yes, we did. We come out publicly and said wrestling was an exhibition, and what we were trying to do, we were trying to get all the beer drinkers and cigar smokers in the front row that wanted to see blood. We were trying to get rid of them. We were trying to get the families in the front row. And so we told everybody, look, wrestling is an exhibition. We know who's going to win or lose. insult the public's intelligence and thinking, I was like, this is entertainment, this is not a real sport. Everything we're doing here in wrestling and as Hulk Hogan is just entertainment. That's what really took off.
Does the word sports entertainment accurately describe how they were referring to it at that time? Is that a fair characterization?
That's fair. It took a little while to get some of the guys up to speed, but that's very fair.
Did the physicality of it change at all?
No, sir, the physicality became worse.
I want to talk.
The physicality became worse because we started trying to outdo each other for the entertainment part, so it got a little crazy.
All right, and so for the jury's benefit, if they've watched wrestling or if they watch it, when they see someone jump off the top rope and land on somebody else, that part of it is physically what they're seeing, right?
Well, if I was to jump off the top rope onto you, I would do everything I could.
We don't want to do that. Not in here anyway. But
You don't want to go on the top rope yet. But if I was to go to the top rope and jump on you, I would do everything I could to catch you. But you have to make contact in what we call you have to land. A lot of the promoters would tell me when you kick somebody, make sure you need to do lace fronts on. So they want full contact in the right areas.
going back to the injuries you've suffered, though, those were injuries that were a consequence of some of these moves not being fully protected, or maybe just whatever happens in the ring. Is that fair?
That's kind of fair. I think a lot of the injuries that happened to my back surgeries were probably because I wrestled too long. I probably should have put the injuries earlier.
We've talked about the character. We've used the word character, the Iron Sheik character, the Hulk Hogan character. I want you to try and explain this to the jury. When you talk about the Hulk Hogan character, what's the personality of that character?
Oh my gosh, the Hulk Hogan character is the all-American good guy, loud, sometimes not loud, but always in character, using slang like brother, dude, and used to have a full head of hair. Just the all-American good guy, fights for the rights of every man. That whole character theme driven was kind of like perfect storm.
Right. Okay, this is a good time. The judge wants to take a comfort break, I think, right now. So.
We're going to take a little bit of a comfort break to rearrange some technology issues.
Okay.
Problems in the program. So let's do this.
Has this not been working the whole time and I didn't know it, or?